My husband's affair partner's husband walked into my office on a Thursday afternoon, sat down without being invited, and told me he knew everything. Then he asked me to marry him. By the end of the week, so we could take them both down together. I thought about it for 4 seconds. Then I said yes. What I did not know, sitting across from that stranger in his charcoal blazer, was that the marriage license was the easy part. The hard part was what we would find buried in the financial records of his own company. The hard part was the phone call I would get on a Thursday evening from a terrified woman who was not supposed to be talking to me. The hard part was standing in my husband's office 6 weeks later, watching him realize that the woman he had betrayed now owned his debt, his company, and the roof over his parents' heads. And the hardest part, the part nobody warns you about, was what happened after the revenge was over. When the man I married for strategy looked at me across his desk, dropped my divorce papers into the recycling bin, and said one word. No, but I am getting ahead of myself. Because to understand how a corporate attorney ends up marrying a stranger to destroy her own husband, you need to understand what he took from me first. And I do not mean the affair. The affair was almost the smallest of it. Stay with me. Because every single detail of this story matters, and the detail that breaks you will not be the one you expect. My name is Stella. I am a corporate mergers and acquisitions attorney at a mid-size firm in Chicago's Loop District. I have spent 12 years learning exactly how companies hide money, exactly how paper trails unravel under scrutiny, and exactly how people with power use legal documents as weapons against people who trust them. I know all of this. I am, quite literally, a professional at spotting deception, which makes what happened in my marriage either deeply ironic or deeply embarrassing, depending on which version of myself I am talking to on a given day. Troy and I met when I was 26. He was charming, funny, tall in the way that photographs, well, the kind of man who makes you feel, when you are with him, that the whole room is organized around the two of you. We got married in Millennium Park on a September afternoon with 80 guests and a string quartet. We built a life together in Lincoln Park. I renovated gray stone with original crown molding and a backyard neither of us spent enough time in. He started a boutique consulting firm, TKS Advisory, and I helped him build it. Not just emotionally. I opened actual doors. I referred him to clients. I co-signed on a commercial lease. I used my professional reputation, which I had spent over a decade constructing one careful decision at a time, to vouch for a man whose business judgment I believed in completely. Remember that. Remember that I vouched for him, because everything that happens later grows out of that single fact. 18 months before everything fell apart, Troy told me we needed to restructure how our assets were held. He said his business attorney had flagged a liability exposure issue. If TKS ever got sued, creditors could potentially come after our personal estate, including the house. The solution, he said, was simple. We would transfer my equity stake in our joint properties into a holding LLC, register it in his name alone, and once things settled down legally, we would restructure it all back. He laid out a thick packet of documents on our kitchen table. He handed me a pen. Now, here's the part I have replayed 10,000 times. I am a lawyer. Reading documents is literally what I do for a living. I read 200-page merger agreements for breakfast. And that evening, with a glass of wine at my elbow and my husband answering my 2 or 3 questions patiently, lovingly, like a man who had my interests completely at heart, I did the one thing I would have fired any junior associate for doing. I signed without reading every page. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because you are probably thinking you would never do that. And maybe you would not. But that is the thing about trust. Trust is not stupidity. Trust is a decision you make one time and then it makes 1,000 smaller decisions for you, quietly, invisibly, every single day. Troy did not need to fool a lawyer, he only needed to fool his wife. And he had 7 years of practice. The day I found out about the affair was a Tuesday. I came home early from a deposition that settled before noon. Troy's laptop was open on the kitchen counter. I was not snooping. I truly was not snooping. I was reaching past it to grab a glass from the cabinet, and the screen lit up, and I saw her name in an email with the subject line, "Thursday still works." I booked the suite at the Waldorf. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I just stood in my own kitchen and felt the floor give way very far away from me, like an earthquake happening in another country. Here is what nobody tells you about that moment. The moment is not the worst part. The worst part is the next moment, and the one after that, when your brain starts rewinding. Every late meeting. Every business trip. Every time his phone lit up face down on the table. Your entire marriage replays itself in fast forward, and every single memory has a second meaning now, and you cannot stop watching. I hired a private investigator that same afternoon, not because I wanted ammunition for a fight, because I am a lawyer, and lawyers do not fight with feelings. We fight with documents. Within 4 days, I had photographs, hotel receipts, and a name. Harper Ashworth, wife of Griffin Ashworth, the CEO of Ashworth Capital Group, a mid-market private equity firm with offices in the merchandise mart. And that is when the story stops being about an affair, because within 5 days, my own attorney had quietly pulled the property records, and what she found made the hotels and the receipts and the Waldorf suite look like a rounding error. The LLC transfer was real, the restructuring was not. One had my set table and my mother's tout. On that Tuesday evening with the wine and the patience and the love, was not temporary protection from liability. It was a permanent legal transfer of every shared asset we owned into Troy's name alone, the house, the equity, everything. From a purely legal standpoint, I had nothing. He had not just been cheating on me, he had been erasing me. Carefully, professionally, for 1.5 years. The affair was the crime of passion. The paperwork was the crime of planning. I did not go back to that house. I stayed with my friend Becca, a paralegal at my firm, who said approximately nothing useful, but made very good coffee and left me alone when I needed it, which was exactly right. I spent those first days reviewing everything, every document, every financial record I could still access, and the more I looked, the colder I got. Not devastated, just cold, focused in a way I had not felt since I passed the bar. Because here is what I knew that Troy had apparently forgotten. I know how paper trails unravel. It is my entire career. And somewhere out there, there was a trail. There is always a trail. What I did not know yet was that someone else had already found it. Griffin Ashworth came to my office the following Thursday. He was tall and composed, with a kind of stillness that comes from either exceptional discipline or genuine indifference to what anyone thinks of him. Charcoal blazer, no tie, a manila folder under his arm. He sat down across from my desk and placed the folder on the glass surface between us without making a sound. "You already know about the affair," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Then we can skip the part where we are both pretending we do not." He slid the folder toward me. "Open to page 3. Page 3 was a spreadsheet. Wire transfers from Ashworth Capital Group's vendor accounts to an entity called Sterling Meridian Consulting LLC. Over an 18-month period, the total exceeded $9 million. The billing descriptions were vague in the way that only deliberate vagueness ever is. Strategic advisory services, market positioning consultation, regulatory readiness review. I have read thousands of invoices in my career. Legitimate consulting bills look messy. They reference deliverables, personnel, dates, phases. These were clean, rounded, repetitive, the financial equivalent of a smile that does not reach the eyes. I cross-referenced the company name in my head. I already knew what I was going to find, and I found it anyway, because hope is the last thing that dies. Troy's firm, I said. Registered under a different entity name 3 months before the contracts began, Griffin said. Harper sits on the LLC as a silent member. She routed the billing through his company to access Ashworth Capital funds. He kept a percentage. The rest came back to her. His voice was flat, not angry. Matter of fact, the way a surgeon describes the location of a tumor. "I discovered it 4 months ago," he said. "I have been building the paper trail ever since. But I need someone inside the firm with executive authority and the legal credentials to initiate a forensic audit without tipping them off." "Why me?" For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Because you have more reason to want this than anyone." Because your professional reputation is impeccable. Because you are a forensically trained M&A attorney who already has every reason to see this through. He paused. And because, legally, a spouse of the CEO has standing to take on a formal role within the firm that no outside hire could assume on this timeline. Let me translate what he was actually saying because it took me a full second to believe it. He was proposing a business marriage, clean and direct as a contract clause. His wife was a silent partner in a fraud against his own company, which meant any investigation he launched personally could be painted as a domestic vendetta and torn apart by her attorneys. But a general counsel with an unimpeachable record, conducting a routine compliance audit, was untouchable. He needed me as his wife and his lawyer. I needed his platform to dismantle what Troy had built, using my resources and my trust. Neither of us believed in anything romantic at that particular moment in our lives. I have conditions, I said, naturally. Full executive authority over legal and compliance, no interference with my methods. And if I find evidence that rises to the criminal level, I report it. You do not get a veto. I watched something move through his expression. I would learn later that this was the moment he decided to trust me. He was offering me $9 million of his company's stolen money as a target, and my first demand was that he could not stop me from following it wherever it led, even to his own doorstep. Agreed, he said. And I want my name on the audit authorization, he said, whatever we find. I want to be the one who opened the investigation. Done. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. Cook County Courthouse, Friday morning, 8 o'clock. I was there at 7:55. The ceremony took 11 minutes. We signed a marriage certificate, shook hands with a county clerk named Darlene, who did not seem to find any of it unusual, and walked out into the gray October air as husband and wife. Griffin's driver pulled a black Escalade to the curb. And here is where I did something that was either the pettiest moment of my life or the most strategically sound. Possibly both. On the hood of that vehicle, I placed the marriage certificate and took a photograph. Our names, side by side. The official seal perfectly centered in the frame. Then I pulled up Troy's contact in my phone. I had not yet changed his label from the one I had saved years ago. Home. I attached the photo and typed, I signed papers this morning too. Different courthouse, different husband. Enjoy the rest of your week. I watched the delivered notification turn to read. Then I put my phone in my bag. Militant, Griffin observed from a few feet away. In litigation, I said, you control the narrative or the narrative controls you. I looked at him. Take me to the office. I have work to do. Now. You might be wondering why I sent that photograph. Why tip him off? Why not keep the marriage quiet? Because panic is a tool. A calm, confident criminal shreds documents and calls attorneys. A panicked one makes mistakes. I did not send Troy that photo to hurt him. I sent it to make him move. And within 5 days, he moved exactly the way I needed him to. But I am getting ahead of myself again. Because before Troy moved, I had to walk into Ashworth Capital as the CEO's brand new wife in front of 400 employees who had watched the real Mrs. Ashworth host the Christmas party 10 months earlier. Ashworth Capital's headquarters occupied the 22nd and 23rd floors of a building on North Wacker. The view of the river from the conference room was genuinely beautiful, which I noticed only briefly before turning my attention to the internal compliance database. Griffin introduced me to the assembled staff as his wife and the incoming general counsel, in the same sentence. The room received this with the careful blankness of people who understood that their safest response was professional neutrality. I counted the faces. Somewhere in that room, I knew, were people who reported to Harper. People who had approved her invoices. People who would be on the phone to her within the hour. That was fine. I wanted them to call. The head of the internal audit team, a man named Wyatt, who had been quietly loyal to Griffin through several internal shifts, became my primary contact. We spent the first 48 hours pulling vendor contract files. By the end of the second day, I had identified 11 fraudulent billing relationships linked directly or indirectly to entities controlled by Harper or Troy. Total exposure just under $9 million over 22 months. But the fraud was not the dangerous part. Fraud is just numbers. The dangerous part was a name I found buried in the compliance department's personnel files. Harper had placed her own compliance officer inside the department, a woman named Dina, and as I discovered through email review, Dina had been approving vendor payments without standard documentation for over a year. Think about what that means. Every internal control at Ashworth Capital flowed through that office, and the person holding the keys worked for the woman robbing the house. The fraud had not survived despite the compliance department. It had survived because of it. On Monday morning, I called Dina into my office with Wyatt present as a witness. Effective immediately, your access to all Ashworth Capital systems has been revoked, I said. I placed her termination notice on the desk. This is termination for cause. If you would like to contest the grounds, the documentation supporting them is available for review by your personal attorney. Dina looked at the letter, then she looked at me. Harper will hear about this. She already knows, I said. She heard the moment you walked in here. I was right. Harper called Griffin before noon, furious. He put her on speaker in my office, met my eyes once, and said nothing while she screamed. When she finished, he said simply, "My general counsel handles all compliance matters. You can direct further concerns to her." And he ended the call. I want to be honest with you about something. In that moment, listening to my husband's mistress scream at my new husband through a speakerphone, I felt something I did not expect to feel. Satisfaction. Real, warm, poisonous satisfaction. And it scared me a little, because I had spent my whole life being the reasonable one, the careful one, the one who read the documents and asked the polite questions. That woman had signed away everything she owned on a Tuesday evening with a glass of wine at her elbow. The woman sitting in that office was someone new, and I did not yet know what she was capable of. By Wednesday, I found out what they were capable of. Troy had apparently decided that the best defense was offense. A message went out to several of my colleagues at my law firm, sent from an anonymous account, but routed through a server in the West Loop, 2 blocks from TKS Advisory's office. The message claimed I had staged a fraudulent marriage to Griffin to gain access to Ashworth Capital's client data, that I had previously misappropriated client funds, that I was under informal review by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. All of it was fabricated, every word. But I know what a lie can do to a career. In my world, an accusation does not need to be true to be fatal. It only needs to be repeated. Managing partners do not wait for verdicts. They wait for the smoke to clear, and they quietly stop assigning you clients while they wait. I felt my chest tighten when Becca forwarded the message to me with a single text. You need to see this. 12 years. 12 years of 70-hour weeks, of missed birthdays, of being the person who never cut a corner, not once, not ever. And my husband, the man I had vouched for with that exact reputation, was burning it down with a fake email account and a server 2 blocks from the office I helped him lease. What I did not anticipate was Griffin's response. He sent a firm-wide communication to all 412 Ashworth Capital employees within 2 hours. He stated plainly that the message was fabricated, that it had been traced to a server linked to TKS Advisory, that his legal team was preparing a defamation suit. He attached the IT department's full analysis. And then he added one more paragraph, the one I read 3 times, standing alone in my office. He said simply that his wife's integrity was not a matter he would allow to be questioned without consequence, and that anyone within the firm found circulating the message would be terminated by end of day. He sent a copy of that communication to the managing partners at my law firm before I had even asked him to. I walked into his office that afternoon and stood in the doorway. You did not have to do it that fast, I said. He looked up from his screen. Yes, I did. I went back to work. But something had shifted and I felt it shift, and I did not have time to examine it. Because the next break in the case was already coming. And it came from the last person in the world I expected. If you are still here, and I have a feeling you are, do me one quick favor. Hit the like button. Not for the algorithm. Well, okay, a little for the algorithm, but mostly because you have earned your place in the story now, and the next part is where everything accelerates. Subscribe if you want more stories where the quiet one wins, because Stella is just getting started. Dina called my cell on a Thursday evening. She was clearly frightened. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who has been rehearsing a phone call in their head for 6 hours and finally run out of reasons not to make it. Harper is moving her shares, she said without preamble. She found out about the audit scope. She is planning to liquidate her entire position in Ashworth Capital, about $12 million in stock, before the findings go public. She knows things the market does not. She is going to use that to walk away clean. I remember standing in Becca's kitchen, holding the phone, and I remember thinking, this is it. Because what Dina had just described was not a marital dispute. It was not even garden variety fraud, that was insider trading. Securities fraud. The kind the SEC takes very seriously, very quickly. Harper was not just stealing money anymore, she was about to sell $12 million of stock to ordinary investors while sitting on information that would crater its value. Every dollar of her escape would come out of the pocket of some stranger's retirement account. And then Dina said the thing that turned my blood cold. She knows I approved those invoices, Stella. If this goes federal, I am going down with her. I have a daughter. I did not know what it was at first, I swear to you. By the time I understood, I was already in it. I want to pause here, because it would be easy to make Dina a villain. She approved the payments. She took the salary. She kept her mouth shut for a year. But standing in that kitchen, I understood something about how these schemes actually work. Nobody recruits an accomplice on day one. They recruit a person on day one and the complicity arrives later in increments too small to feel like a choice. That is exactly what Troy did to me with a pen and a packet of documents and a glass of wine. The only difference between Dina and me was that she figured it out while she could still be charged for it. Stay on the line, I told her. Do not call Harper. Do not warn anyone. I will call you back in 20 minutes, and I'm going to tell you exactly what to do next, and if you do it, I will personally make sure the government knows you came forward first. I called Wyatt. I called Griffin. And at 8:15 the next morning, I called my contact at the Chicago Regional SEC office, a woman I had worked alongside 3 years earlier on an unrelated matter. By noon, a formal notification had been filed. By 2 o'clock, a regulatory hold had been placed on Harper's brokerage account. The sale never cleared. $12 million, frozen. Hours before execution. If Dina had waited one more day, if she had let fear win for one more night, Harper Ashworth would have vanished into that money, like a stone into a lake. But here's the thing about freezing someone's escape route. A trapped person does not surrender. A trapped person looks for leverage. And Harper and Troy were about to discover that leverage cuts both ways. Because while they had been planning their exits, Griffin had been quietly doing something I did not fully understand until he explained it to me over coffee that Saturday morning. He had learned through his banking contacts that Troy had taken out a $1.4 million line of credit from a commercial lender, secured against TKS Advisory's accounts receivable, and separately against a residential property in Evanston, a property that belonged to his parents. The loan had gone into default 2 weeks prior. The bank was preparing collection proceedings. Griffin's firm acquired the distress note by Friday. Let me make sure you understand what that means, because it took me a moment too. When a loan goes into default, the debt itself becomes an asset that can be bought and sold. And the person who owns the debt owns the power over everything pledged against it. Griffin, and by extension I, now held Troy's debt. His company. His receivables. And his parents' house. The same man who had signed my home out from under me had pledged his own parents' home to cover his losses. Robert and Eunice, 2 retired public servants who had called me their daughter for 7 years. They did not know. They did not know any of it. I drove out to TKS Advisory's office in the West Loop on a Monday. The suite was quieter than it should have been for mid-morning. 2 desks sat empty. A third had a plant on it that had not been watered in some time. The empire Troy had built with my reputation was already hollow. He just had not admitted it yet. He was in his office with the blinds half shut, staring at a screen he was not really reading. When I walked in, he stood up. Something moved across his face. Contempt first. Then fear. when he registered what I was carrying. I set the loan assignment paperwork on his desk. Ashworth Capital Ventures acquired your commercial note from Midwest First Bank, I said. That makes me your primary creditor. The default covenanters give us the right to demand immediate settlement of the outstanding balance, or begin collection proceedings on all collateral assets. That includes your parents' home in Evanston. Troy went pale. Stella. He said it carefully, like he was not sure anymore what name I would answer to. That house has nothing to do with any of this. They do not even know what is happening. I know. He looked at me. Really looked. Maybe for the first time in a long time. What do you want? Sign the equity transfer. I slid the document across the desk. Every share of TKS Advisory. And the deed to the Wabash property. The one you transferred out of my name 18 months ago. Both of them. Full restitution. And my parents' house is not something I want. Sign the papers and I will not touch it. He sat down slowly. And I watched a man I had once loved completely reconstruct the architecture of his entire life inside his head and find nothing left that held any weight. He picked up the pen. His hand was not steady. Now. You are probably waiting for me to tell you how good that felt. The pen shaking. The great reversal, complete. The betrayer signing everything back to the betrayed. Here is the truth. It felt like nothing. It felt like watching a building you used to live in get demolished. You do not cheer. You just stand there on the sidewalk thinking about all the mornings you made coffee in a kitchen that no longer exists. After the documents were signed and witnessed by my attorney, I gathered them and stood. I looked at him one last time. He was slumped in his chair in a way I had never seen before. Not the boneless ease of comfort, but the collapse of someone who had spent too long performing solidity and finally run out of the energy to keep it up. And then I said something I had not planned to say. You should call your parents. Not about any of this. Just call them. I do not know why I said it. Maybe because I knew what was coming for him. Federal investigators, and indictments, and a sentencing table. And I knew that after it all landed, the only people in the world who would still answer his calls were two retired public servants in Evanston who had raised him better than this. I drove home through the city in the early dark, and I did not feel victorious. I felt wrung out. The way you feel after a long trial. Not like a winner, exactly. Like someone who got through something. I still had one stop to make. And if I am honest, this is the stop I had been dreading more than Troy's office. More than the fraud, more than the photograph on the hood of the Escalade. Because Troy had chosen his side, but Robert and Eunice had never chosen any of this, and someone had to tell them. And it was not going to be him. Troy's parents lived in a 2-story craftsman in Evanston, with a covered porch and a maple tree that turned a furious orange every October. Eunice had taught 2nd grade for 31 years. Robert had worked for the city assessor's office. They had called me their daughter. I had called them that too, in the private language of people who choose each other. Eunice opened the door before I reached the porch steps. She was wearing a cream-colored cardigan and had flour on her sleeve from something she had been baking, and the moment she saw my face, her expression changed. Something happened, she said. Yes. We sat at the kitchen table, where I had eaten probably 40 Sunday dinners. The house smelled like sugar and rosemary. Robert came in from the den and sat across from me, and I told them. I told them everything except the worst financial details, enough that they understood what their son had done, what was coming, and what I had done to protect them from the part they had not chosen. Their house was safe. The note was mine now, and it would never be called. Not by me, not ever. Eunice's hands were folded on the table. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "We raised him better than this." "I know you did." Robert looked at the surface of the table. He looked like a man calculating a sum that kept coming out wrong, no matter how many times he tried. "Are you going to be all right?" he asked. "Not about the money. About me." I had to press my lips together for a moment. Yes. I left an envelope on the table before I walked out. A check I had no legal obligation to write from my first general counsel bonus addressed to them both. It did not cover anything that had been taken from me. It was not meant to. It was the only language I had left for. You were part of my family, and I am not punishing you for what he did. I sat in my car in their driveway for a few minutes. The maple tree was lit up gold under the streetlight. I thought about 10 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas Eves, and the way Eunice always cut the pie before anyone asked if they wanted a second piece, because she already knew they did. Divorce lawyers will tell you that when a marriage ends, you lose a person. They are wrong. You lose a country. You lose a country. You lose every citizen of it. The friends who were really his friends. The traditions that belong to the couple and not to you. The parents who loved you but share blood with the man who broke you. Nobody writes a settlement agreement for any of that. There is no restitution for the pie. Then I started the car and drove back to the city. Harper was arrested on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks later at her condo on East Erie Street. The SEC's Enforcement Division moved jointly with the FBI's white-collar crime unit. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud, the last count arising from her coordinated scheme with Troy to funnel Ashworth Capital funds through TKS Advisory. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea at the arraignment. It did not hold for long. Because Troy had been picked up by federal investigators the same morning, and Troy cooperated, he gave them everything: transaction records, emails, and, in a detail so perfect I would not have dared invent it, a voice memo he had apparently kept on his own phone in which Harper spelled out the billing arrangement with the particular clarity of someone who trusted the wrong person to handle her paperwork. The man who had spent 18 months building a flawless paper wall around his betrayal handed federal prosecutors a recording of his co-conspirator explaining the entire scheme. His sentencing guidelines were substantially reduced as a result. He received 4 years at a federal correctional facility in Oxford, Wisconsin. Harper received 8. The judge at sentencing cited the deliberate nature of the fraud and the calculated use of her position as a shareholder's spouse to access and exploit privileged corporate information. Her assets, the Ashworth stock, 3 real estate holdings, and several accounts the SEC had managed to locate, were frozen pending restitution proceedings. I watched the sentencing from a seat in the gallery. Griffin sat next to me. He did not say anything when the verdicts were read, neither did I. There was not anything to say that the room had not already said more permanently. And this, right here, is where the story is supposed to end. The fraudsters in handcuffs. The assets recovered. The wronged woman vindicated in a courtroom. If this were a movie, the credits would roll over a shot of me walking out of that courthouse into the sunlight. But real life has a cruel sense of humor about endings. Because the revenge was finished. The ledger was clean. And I was still, legally, married to a man I had wed in 11 minutes for strategic purposes. Which meant there was one document left to write. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I drafted the dissolution of marriage petition. I am an attorney. I know how to write clean language. I wrote it clearly, signed it, notarized it at the office, and brought it to Griffin on a Wednesday afternoon when he was between calls. This was the deal. This had always been the deal. The marriage was a legal instrument with an expiration date, and the date had arrived. He would sign, we would file, and we would shake hands in some conference room and go back to being 2 strangers who had once burned down a small empire together. He read it. He turned it over. He read it again. Then he set it on his desk, pressed both palms flat against the edge, and said, "No." I looked at him. "It is not a counter-argument," I said. "It is a legal document. I understand what it is." He stood up and walked around the desk. I had learned by then that Griffin treated the desk as a negotiating barrier, and he only crossed it when he was done negotiating. "I am not signing it." "Griffin, I am telling you the terms have changed," he said. "I want to renegotiate." He said it the way he said everything, directly, without performance. "I want the same partner, permanent arrangement, full equity stake, shared liability, no exit clause. This is a marriage," I said, "not a contract." "For me," he said, "they are the same thing." He looked at me with the kind of steadiness I had spent 8 months learning to read accurately. "I want you to stay. Not because I need a general counsel, because I want you here. I want to tell you that I had a witty response ready. I did not. I stood in his office, holding nothing, while the least sentimental man I had ever met made the most sentimental argument I had ever heard, in the only language he knew how to speak. He did not offer me flowers. He offered me shared liability, and somehow, from him, that meant more than flowers ever could. Because I looked at the dissolution papers on his desk, and I thought about the woman I was before I signed those other papers. 18 months and a lifetime ago. The one who trusted the wrong person because trusting people was simply what she did. And I thought about the woman I was now, who had walked through the past 8 months with every nerve on fire and her hand steady anyway. Griffin was not Troy. He was harder to know, colder on the surface, and almost constitutionally incapable of sentimentality. But he was exactly what he said he was, every single day. After what I had been through, that was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. If we are renegotiating, I said, I want final say on all significant financial decisions. You already have that. And I want the lake house to go in my name. His mouth twitched. Done. Then I will think about it. He picked up the dissolution papers and dropped them in the recycling bin under his desk. That is a legal document, I said. I will shred it later, he said. I laughed. It came out of me before I could decide whether to let it. And he looked at me, really looked, the way he rarely did in professional settings, the way I had come to recognize as the unguarded version of him. And something in his expression settled into place. I moved back into the North Shore house that weekend, not as a guest, not as a contractual occupant, as the person who lived there, who had keys and a section of the closet and strong opinions about where the coffee maker should go. Our life was not a romantic comedy. We both worked too much, argued too often about things that did not matter and things that did, and ate dinner at 9 o'clock most nights, because neither of us remembered to stop for it earlier. But there was an ease to it that I had not felt in years, the ease of being exactly who you are, with someone who has seen the sharpest version of you and found it worth keeping around. One evening in early spring, we were on the back terrace with a bottle of Bordeaux and the lake going silver-gray below us, and Griffin said, without looking at me, "You know what I respect most about how you handled all of this." "My billing rate," I said. "That you never stopped being decent." He swirled his glass. "You were ruthless when you needed to be. But you wrote that check to Robert and Eunice. You drove out there and sat with them at their kitchen table. You advocated for Troy's reduced sentence, even when you had no obligation to." He glanced at me then. "That is not strategy. That is character. I thought about Eunice's kitchen, the flower on her sleeve. We raised him better than this." "It cost me something," I said. "Being decent always does," he said. "That is what makes it worth anything." The lake was quiet below us. Somewhere down the shoreline, a light was moving through the dark. I had spent 7 years building a life with someone who treated my trust as a resource to be extracted. And I had spent 8 months building something entirely different, harder, stranger, with a man I had chosen for all the wrong reasons that somehow turned out to be exactly right. The revenge was long finished. The balance had been restored. The ledger, as I used to say in a different professional life, was clean. What I had not expected, what you cannot plan for, no matter how many variables you account for, was that the best thing to come out of the worst year of my life would be the one contract I actually wanted to keep. So, here's what I want to leave you with. Everyone loves the revenge part of this story. The frozen accounts, the shaking pen, the photograph on the hood of the Escalade. And I will not pretend those moments did not matter. They did. But the older I get, the more I believe the revenge was never the point. The point was the kitchen table in Evanston. The point was Dina's phone call, and a terrified woman choosing to do the right thing one day before it was too late. The point was a county clerk named Arlene and a county courthouse on a gray October morning, and 2 broken people who signed a piece of paper for all the wrong reasons, and then spent 8 months accidentally becoming the right ones. Troy took my house, my money, and my trust, and he got 4 years in Wisconsin. But the thing he actually stole from me, the thing I had to fight to get back, was the belief that trusting someone was not a weakness. I sign things carefully now. I read every page, but I still sign. If this story kept you with me all the way to the end, then you are exactly the person I am telling these stories for. So here is my ask, and I mean it. Hit that subscribe button right now, because next week's story is about a woman who found a second family living in her house, and it is somehow even more unbelievable than this one. Like this video if you believe character outlasts strategy. And tell me in the comments, honestly, would you have sent that photograph to Troy, or would you have stayed silent and struck without warning? I read every single comment, and I already know this one is going to start a debate. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. I am Stella, the ledger is clean. And for the first time in a long time, so am I.